The fear of loneliness as a female emotional inheritance. From a very early age, women were taught that being alone is wrong, that their worth depends on how much they are desired, how much they are chosen, how much someone decides to love them. The silence of an empty home became a symbol of failure. The absence of a partner was labelled as a kind of invisible flaw, as if a woman without someone is inevitably incomplete. People say is that this fear of loneliness is not natural. It's conditioning. An ancestral narrative passed down through generations, where a woman's emotional survival was always tied to the presence of another. A myth built on phrases like, "No one wants a woman who's alone," "You need to get married soon," "Time is passing," as if time measured worth, as if the soul's clock obeyed the social calendar. Carl Jung said that everything we deny in ourselves becomes shadow. And perhaps the fear of being alone is just that, the collective shadow of a culture that taught women to lose themselves in others to avoid facing their own souls. That's why so many stay in empty relationships that hurt, that erase, that limit, just to avoid facing the mirror of silence. Because emptiness for those who don't know themselves is terrifying. And that's exactly where the prison lies, in the idea that being alone means being less. What happens when this woman decides to question everything? When she realizes that silence is not punishment, but invitation. When she understands that solitude is not the end, it's the beginning. Topic 2. The transition. From needing company to choosing presence. There's a nearly imperceptible moment, a silent breaking point, when a woman starts to feel that the presence of others no longer fills her like it used to. What once felt necessary now feels, hey, what used to be a search now feels like escape. She doesn't know exactly when it happened, but something inside her changed. Being with others no longer means being at peace. That's where the transition begins. She stops chasing, stops filling her schedule, stops maintaining connections just to avoid loneliness. She begins to say no to empty encounters, shallow conversations, and promises that don't resonate as true. And that no, which once came with guilt, now comes with relief. At first, the silence feels heavy, the absence uncomfortable. But soon she discovers a new way of being, presence with herself. It's no longer about avoiding emptiness, it's about inhabiting the inner space. It's not about who's beside her, it's about who she's become when no one else is there. Carl Jung wrote that the process of individuation begins when the ego stops seeking wholeness externally and begins to dialogue with the soul. This woman begins to see that being alone is not absence. It's undistracted presence, authentic presence, felt presence. She starts to see beauty in doing things alone, not as resistance, but as ritual. Breakfast becomes a moment of connection. Silent reading becomes prayer. Self-care becomes a political act. She no longer needs company to feel alive. She chooses it, and that changes everything. Topic 3. The end of external validation as fuel for self-love. For a long time, her sense of being lovable was defined by how others looked at her. It was in compliments, attention, scraps of affection that she tried to find some sense of value. As if self-love could only exist after someone else confirmed it. But that kind of validation is fragile, volatile. Today they applaud you, tomorrow they ignore you. Today they desire you, tomorrow they forget you. And when you depend on that oscillation, it becomes emotional torture. It was only when she started stepping away from external voices that she heard the internal one. And that voice didn't ask for approval. It asked for respect. Didn't beg for acceptance. It demanded truth. She began asking herself, who am I when no one is watching? And in that question, she found something rare, identity, not the one molded to please, but the essence, silenced by years of expectations. Carl Jung said true freedom only comes when we stop defining ourselves through others' eyes. This woman understood that real self-love doesn't come from the mirror of others' desire. It's born in the intimate, in the invisible. It grows in the moment she chooses herself, even when no one else does. When she stands firm without applause, slowly what used to wound, indifference, rejection, criticism, no longer echoes so loudly, because now she sees herself, and those who truly see themselves no longer get lost trying to be seen. Topic 4. The silence that once hurt, now protects. Silence used to be unbearable. Every minute without a message, a voice, or a noise felt like abandonment. It was in the noise of others that she tried to silence her own. But everything changed when she stopped running. When she chose to face that silence, not as punishment, but as invitation. And in that space where it once hurt, she built a refuge. Now silence doesn't wound, it heals. It doesn't oppress, it sustains. What once felt like absence is now protection. Protection from unnecessary noise, draining relationships, forced affections. She learns that not all presence is connection, and not all silence is loneliness. Sometimes it's sanctuary. Topic 5. The deconstruction of the needy woman. Birth of the whole woman. She once accepted crumbs. She confused attention with love, presence with connection, need with affection. She lived through relationships where the fear of being alone was greater than the pain of being poorly accompanied. But there comes a point when exhaustion becomes clarity. She no longer wants to be half of anything. She no longer wants to live trying to fit into someone. And when she stops searching for a savior and starts rebuilding from within, everything changes. She becomes whole. Carl Jung would call this the return to the self. She no longer needs a relationship to validate herself. She needs truth, genuine exchange, soul to soul. Topic 6. Carl Jung and female individuation. Her journey is not romantic. It's archetypal. She's living the process Jung called individuation, the return to essence, to wholeness, to inner totality. It's when a woman stops shaping herself to please and starts expressing herself to exist. When she integrates the shadow, her wounds, her rage, her pain, and realizes all of it is also her. She no longer wants to appear perfect. She wants to be real. She trades the fairy tale for raw truth. She gives up happily ever after for the peace of being who she is, here and now. Topic 7. Breaking the cycle of begging for love in shallow relationships. She used to wait for messages that never came, used to accept crumbs thinking it was a feast, used to shrink herself to fit into hearts that were too small. But when she realized that love can't be begged, only recognized, she broke away from it all. She let go of the fantasy that someday someone would finally see her and started seeing herself from within. Now, if a relationship lacks reciprocity, she doesn't insist. If there's no depth, she doesn't bend. Because she learned, what's real doesn't have to be begged for. Topic 8. The woman who doesn't want to be saved, only respected. For centuries, women were taught to wait for a savior, but she doesn't want to be rescued anymore. She wants to be respected. She's no longer looking for someone to pull her out of the abyss. She's learned to climb out on her own. Now she wants someone to walk beside her. No chains, No empty promises. No games. She doesn't need a hero. She needs an equal. Carl Jung said, "Everything we don't face in ourselves will appear as fate." And she faced it all. That's why now what she seeks is maturity, not salvation. Topic 9. The raw feminine energy. Magnetism of a free woman. There's something magnetic about a woman who is self-sufficient. She doesn't need to seek attention. She radiates presence. And that's exactly what attracts, confuses, unsettles. She's not trying to impress. She doesn't perform sweetness. She simply is. And that raw, unfiltered, whole state has power. Because when a woman is connected to her own essence, she emits a frequency that can't be faked, only felt. Topic 10. The gaze of others. Misunderstanding, judgment, and fear. People look at her and judge. She's alone because she's difficult, because she demands too much, because she's cold. But what they don't know is that she used to be the opposite of all that. She used to be light, she used to give in, she used to stay quiet to fit in. And that's exactly what broke her. Now she unsettles because she doesn't bow. She scares because she doesn't need. Topic 10. The gaze of others. Misunderstanding, judgment, and fear. People look at her and judge. She's alone because she's difficult, because she demands too much, because she's cold. But what they don't know is that she used to be the opposite of all that. She used to be light. She used to give in. She used to stay quiet to fit in. And that's exactly what broke her. Now she unsettles because she doesn't bow. She scares because she doesn't need. Even on the darkest days, she remains faithful to her own light. Because she's learned, not every sense of longing means something is missing. Sometimes it's just the echo of a cycle being healed. Topic 12. When she understands that peace is expensive, but worth every cent. She realized that maintaining her own peace comes at a cost, and the cost is saying no. It's walking away. It's losing people she once thought she needed, but in return, she gains something non-negotiable. The calm of sleeping beside herself, without betrayal, without having to fake, without abandoning herself just to be accepted. And once a woman tastes the flavor of her own peace, she never again accepts the bitter taste of emotional submission. Topic 13. The new compass. Discernment over desperation. She once chose out of loneliness. She once said yes just to avoid being alone. Today, she only says yes if it's real. The old compass, the one that sought affection at any cost, has been replaced by discernment. She no longer seeks what looks good on the outside. She seeks what's honest on the inside. She prefers the doubt of solitude over the certainty of pain. And this new compass always points to the same place, the soul. Topic 14. She no longer wants a partner. She wants a conscious mirror. Today, she's not waiting for a match. She's waiting for a reflection, someone who won't complete her, but will walk beside her, someone who doesn't need healing because they've already faced their own wounds. She wants soul connection, not distraction. Exchange, not dependency. Presence, not performance. And until that mirror appears, she'd rather look at herself, because she's already learned to see her own worth. Topic 15. Being unshakable not because she doesn't feel, but because she feels and still moves. She feels everything. She cries when needed, trembles when it hurts, goes silent when wounded, but even so, she moves forward with the dignity of someone who has already fallen and stood back up, of someone who was once rejected and still chose herself, of someone who lived in halves and now only accepts wholeness. She's unshakable not because she has no fear, but because she's learned not to freeze in front of it. She walks with her scars exposed, but with her gaze steady, and that's what makes her so dangerous. She doesn't need anyone in order to be. And precisely because of that, she's free to choose with her whole heart.